What's up, everybody? Today I have another full edit tutorial in Photoshop of this photograph of Angela where I'm going to cover my entire process from the skin retouching to how I color graded the skin tone and how did I get those rich blue tones in the background. If you're interested on how I took this photograph and seeing the behind the scenes photograph and the camera settings, make sure you follow me on Instagram because that's where I post all of my behind the scenes content. Before we start, if there's anything that you would specifically like to learn in Photoshop, whether it's editing in Lightroom, Capture One, or Photoshop, let me know in the comments below and I'll make sure I make that video for you guys here on my YouTube channel. Now let's get started and cover todo el pedo. All right, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make a duplicate of the background. I'm gonna go to my cleanup layer and now I have a duplicate of the background and I wanna remove this softbox that's in the frame. Photoshop should do a pretty easy job with the content aware because this is blurred out and it's just the sky in the background. If I had more distractions, this probably wouldn't work out. So I like using the patch tool. You can also use the lasso tool. So I'm just gonna make a selection of what I wanna remove. Then I'm gonna push Shift and then F5 on the keyboard. And I'm gonna make sure my content is content aware and then hit OK. In Photoshop, this should be a pretty easy task for it to complete. And there you go. I'm gonna push Control D to deselect and then Control minus to zoom out. Now there aren't a lot of distractions in this image to clean up. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and jump into frequency separation. I'm gonna run my action. And I'm gonna make sure that I zoom in on the skin because my goal here is to separate the texture from the skin. So the number is gonna be very important and this number is gonna be different on image to image. Now the key thing to remember, the closer you frame your shot of your subject, typically that means the radius number is going to be at a higher number. And since this is a full body shot, my radius is probably going to stay at a lower number. So I think 12 is going to work good for me, but I'm just taking a look all around to make sure I have everything out as far as the texture is concerned. So 13 should be fine. So I'm going to hit OK. And those of you that have seen my tutorials, I think this is the 6th full edit that I've done, 6th or 7th. You'll know that I like doing my texture cleanup or my blemish cleanup on the texture layer because I'm only moving the texture and not necessarily color. And my choice for this, my tool of choice, is going to be the clone stamp. You can also use the healing brush, which is going to be, I think I put mine to J on the keyboard, or healing brush. I just prefer the clone stamp. There really isn't much of a difference. And then I'm going to make sure that it's set to current layer here at the top. I'm also going to right click and make sure that my hardness is at around 40 to 35. And the reason for that is I still want to keep those sharp edges of that texture as I'm cleaning this texture up. Now the key thing here is obviously you want to make sure that you're selecting similar texture so that the texture blends and it has a nice cohesive transition. So that's what I'm going to be doing here on this first step here as I'm cleaning up these blemishes, just using the clone stamp. And I'm just going to be removing any blemishes that I see. Now that I'm done cleaning up the blemishes, now it's time to mix this color and use frequency separation on the color layer so that I can smooth out transitions and speed up my dodge and burn process. One of the questions I get a lot is like, well, Eli, I love dodge and burn, but I do a lot of client work. I want to maybe a little bit faster pace technique to do my skin retouching, and frequency separation is going to be that answer. Now, still with frequency separation, I'm going to go into the color layer here. And because I've separated it, you'll see that I'm not going to be manipulating any of the texture. But I can push and mix these colors so that they blend and they have these nice transitions. So let's focus on this area right here because you can see that these transitions are off a little bit. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Angela had burned herself with the hair straightener here. So that's why there was that little mark there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the mixer brush. And then my settings up here are 50, 40, 40, 40, and then 10. Keep in mind that I am using a tablet, so those settings might be different for you if you decide to use the trackpad on your mouse or on your laptop, and then also your mouse. So these numbers are gonna work depending on what you're using. So the way this works is I'm gonna leave my texture off just so that you can see what's gonna happen here. As I push, I'm mixing these colors and blending these colors through. Okay, so that's my goal on this step. You'll see that I have some highlights here. So I'm gonna just push some of this color back in. And I'm just trying to even out these transitions. Now, if I leave the texture back on, I can definitely do it with it on. And I like using the helper layer because what it's gonna do is it's going to make the image black and white. And the purpose of making it black and white is that it's allowing me to see those transitions a lot easier. So with it being black and white now, I can definitely see where these transitions need to be fixed and where they can blend a little bit better. So I'm just gonna use the mixer brush for this next step to kind of blend these colors. Now, if you wanna see a more in-depth tutorial, I have a dedicated video with a free action on my YouTube channel. So check that out if you're new to the channel. Now here's an area where it's a little bit overexposed. I did have my light camera left, so the light's coming down here. So obviously the light is gonna hit the arm and the leg here first. So I wanna just even out this transition so it matches this skin tone. So I find that frequency separation does a great job on the arms and the legs. So I'm just gonna simply grab some of this kind of shadow darkness here, and I'm just gonna slowly raise it up just so that we can blend that out. Let's take a look at what I've done so far. So I'm gonna go ahead and take off the helper layer. And I like my frequency separation to have a duplicate of the color layer so that I could always just see the before and after. So this is what I've done so far, was just frequency separation, trying to smooth out the colors. Now, if we look at the leg here, and if I see the before and after, and you'll see that I've tried to even out those transitions there. And so far it's looking good. I haven't gone to the face, so that's the next area that I'm gonna work with. Now, one of the things I'm gonna do here is I have this cheekbone and I wanna select all that color with the selection tool. And then I'm gonna use Gaussian blur to kind of blend things together. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my lasso tool. I'm gonna have my feather at 10 and I'm making sure that I'm on the color layer. I'm gonna go ahead and select all around this area. Now the key thing is to find a section that's very similar. And I wanna spread out this color so it kind of evens out here. So I'm gonna go to filter, blur, then Gaussian blur. And you'll see right away when I take off the preview, this is the before and then the after and how that blends. Now, the number might be a little bit too high for me, so I'm gonna maybe go about 18, and there we go. So I'm gonna push Control D to deselect that. So once again, if we look at the cheek there, kind of soften that out. Now, if I flattened it out, that's okay, because when I come back with Dodge and Burn, I can contour this and kind of reshape it if I need to. So that's what I'm gonna be focusing on now, is I'm gonna use the lasso tool and that blur technique to kind of even out areas that I feel need to be a little bit more smooth. And that pretty much does it for frequency separation so far. I like the results that I have. If I go to my color layer, I can see this is the before and then the after, and I definitely wanna zoom in, because I know on the computer, or if you're looking on a phone, might be a little bit difficult to see. So let's go right about here. This is the before and then the after. Let's go to the face, before, after. And I think, like I said, the legs are probably the best part for frequency separation. Definitely smooths things out. So far it's looking good. Now we're gonna get into Dodge and Burn. I hope you're enjoying the tutorial so far. And if you wanna learn more skills, I wanna talk about today's sponsor, which is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives. Skillshare offers thousands of inspiring classes for creative people on topics including photography, productivity, business, and more. Make great use of your time and check out Skillshare's online classes, which include a combination of video lessons and class projects. They have a wide range of categories from photography, film and video, and graphic design. One of my favorite classes that I watched was Learn Adobe After Effects CC 2019 for Beginners by Jordy, which is from one of my favorite YouTube channels, Cinecom.net. What I really enjoyed about this class was the project files that were included so that you could download and follow along throughout the class. I finally have a full understanding of motion tracking, 3D camera tracking, and advanced animations, which I want to include in my YouTube channel. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 2-month free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. Before we do get into dodge and burn, I also want to make sure on my color opacity backup layer, it's always a good idea to reduce the opacity just in case you went a little bit too far. So I like to go anywhere from like 60 to 85. In this specific image, I think 85 is going to look good. So I'm going to go ahead and close my frequency separation. I'm going to go back to my actions and I'm going to run the dodge and burn 2020 action that I have. And this process I've sped up because of the frequency separation. So what I'm going to do is under dodge, I'm going to lighten up transitions manually with the brush tool. So let me get the brush. I'm going to get my Todo el Pedo brush. All it is opacity 100, flow at 1%. And all I'm going to use is I'm going to use my helper layer, once again, making it black and white as we discussed earlier. And this is going to help us see the transition areas that need to be tweaked a little bit more. And the dodge is going to help me lighten up areas to even out transitions. And the burn is going to allow me to darken areas. So I'm going to get my brush tool. We're going to start off, I usually start off with dodge first. And I'm going to come in here with the brush tool. And I'm just going to start evening out some of these transitions that I wasn't able to get with my frequency separation. Whenever I'm doing my dodge, I try to think of it as I'm going to soften up my shadows and not get rid of them, but just soften them up just so that we have some nice, beautiful transitions and just so that those darker areas aren't as contrasty. Now I'm noticing that the arm still is a little bit bright, so this is where I'm going to get my burn so I can darken up some of these areas so that this arm isn't as bright. So let's take a look at what I have so far. So let's look at the dodge now, the dodge and burn. This is the before, and this is the after. And let's hone in on the dodge. I'm going to hold Alt on the keyboard and click the mask, and that'll show me exactly where I've lightened up areas. And if I hold Alt on the dodge, this is where I've dodged areas. I'm going to spend just a little bit more time on my dodge and burn, and then we're going to move on to the next step. And I'm happy there with my dodge and burn. I probably could spend a little bit more time to get a little bit more precise. But for the video, I think you guys pretty much get the concept of what I'm trying to do here with dodge and burn. Let's go ahead and take a look at everything together, the frequency separation and dodge and burn together. So this is our before and then our after. Now, before we move on to the contouring, I did notice as I was double checking it that here I did remove too much of the shadow in my opinion. So I'm going to go back to my dodge. And that's what's cool about using it with curves is now I can use the black brush and I can kind of undo some of the areas that I might have removed the shadows a little bit too much. So I'm going to bring back just a little bit of that shadow. And I think there that looks a lot better. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another dodge separate from the main one that I have here. And the reason for that is that I'm going to focus on areas where I want to bring out the highlights and I want to contour a little bit. So I'm going to change my flow to 8% flow. And I'm simply just going to brush in just a little bit here on the hair, just to give the hair just a little bit of glow. And I'm looking for areas that already have light. And I might even just add just a little bit here on the nose. And I can also zoom in on the lips and even out some of those transitions. I'll go ahead and put it at 4% flow though for the lips. And so I'm gonna dodge this now. And I'm gonna lighten this up and just even out some of these transitional areas. And the same thing here with the upper lip. And the Cupid's bow, I think that's what this area is called as well. Just add a little bit of shine there. And any other areas? Let me see if there's anything else that I would want to pop. And I think that's pretty much it for the dodge. I'm going to add another burn for the curves. This time though, I'm going to put it like at 3%. And I'm going to bring back in just a little bit of that cheekbone. We talked about that earlier with the frequency separation. I told you that I wanted to darken it up and bring back just a little bit of that shape back. Okay, so I'm just doing it a little bit, evening out some of those transitions there. I think we'll go ahead and add just a little bit more shadow here. I think I lightened it up too much, as I mentioned earlier. I'm going to push back in this shadow just a little bit more. Right here. I think I'll add a little bit of shadow down here as well. And this is going to make your image, give you that three-dimensional pop by darkening up certain areas, especially like right here where she's sitting. This area obviously would be a little bit more dark. So I'm going to darken up back here, underneath the arm, and just a little touch there. Okay. I'm also going to look at the eyes. You're going to notice that one of the catch lights, I got it on one of the eyes, and this one it's not as, you can't see it as much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to use the clone stamp, and I'm going to copy one of the catch lights over to the other eye. So I'm going to make my new layer here by hitting this little plus icon. We're going to go to the clone stamp, and then here it says sample. Do I want to sample from the current layer? Well, no, I don't, because there's nothing on this layer. So I want to make sure I sample from all of the layers. Make sure opacity 100%. Flow at 100%. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to get my brush, and I'm going to press the left bracket to make it about the size of the catch light. I'm going to hold Alt. I'm going to duplicate those pixels, and I'm going to move my cursor, and I'm going to land it right where this other catch light should have been, which is right about there. So now I have two catch lights there. Boom, boom. I'm going to rename this layer just so I stay nice and organized. So I'm going to name this catch light. What I want to do now is I want to color grade the sunset. We have this beautiful sunset, and we want to bring out those red and yellow tones, and we're going to do that with Selective Color. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse my local dodge and burn because we're done with that. I'm going to go to my adjustment layers. We're going to go to Selective Color, and we know that the sunset is dominantly in the reds and in the yellows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust these numbers. So I'm going to go to -29, 9, 15, and 7. Just on the reds. And if I just click the eyeball here, you'll see that it's popping out just a little bit. I know it's affecting her skin. We're going to adjust that in a little bit. We're going to now go into yellows. We're going to go to -21. We're going to go 8, 13, and 10. There we go. So as I mentioned before, it's adjusting her skin tone, and it actually isn't looking bad, but I made this adjustment specifically for the sunset in the background. So there's a couple of ways I can do this. What I'm going to try first is I'm going to try the select subject. So I'm going to go to subject, select the subject, and we'll see if Photoshop does a pretty good job. And it does actually do a good job. And what I want to do, because I have it selected, white basically means that whole adjustment was being added to the overall image. I'm going to get the paint bucket, and I'm going to make sure it's black. And if I click in there, now by making it black, it's removing it from the skin tone and the area that's selected. So if I press Control and then D, you'll see now the before and then the after, that the subtle adjustment that I have on that sunset is only being added to the background. The next thing I'm going to do is we're going to focus on the skin tones. Now, lately, one of my favorite methods of addressing the skin tones is using gradient maps. So let me show you what the gradient maps does. And I have a dedicated video on 3 different ways to edit the skin tone. And where is it? Right here, gradient map skin tone. When I hit this button, and this is an action I've made myself, if I hit the play button here, what I've done is I've used this gradient to kind of add into my skin tones. Now, the way this works is what it's going to do is this color to the left. This is being added into my blacks. This is into my shadows. This is my midtones. This is going into my highlights, and this is going into my whites. So if I hit the before and then the after, you'll notice, and I think the key thing here is to look at this little cheekbone here, right? It's a little bit dark. It's almost like in the blue purple tones almost, right? And then when I add this, it kind of adds it nice and clean throughout this area of the cheek and the rest of the skin tones. So what I need to do is, obviously right now it's being applied to the overall image. What I'm going to need to do is I'm going to push Control and then I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to brush this in specifically just on the skin. Now, these gradient maps, in my opinion, work best when you're working with the shadow area parts of the skin. It just adds this nice color into the shadows. So that pretty much covers the skin tone. So if you feel like you went a little bit too far with this, I could always lower down my opacity. So I have mine at 50. I can go all the way down to maybe 40. I'll go about 42. And that pretty much covers our skin tone. I'm going to go ahead and go to camera raw filter now. So I'm just going to run this action. This just merges everything in together and makes it into a smart object. And I already have the settings that I used in camera raw filter saved. So I'm going to go ahead and double click camera raw filter. And I'm going to go to load settings and we're going to go to Angela YouTube. And I'm just going to quickly go through these settings. These are very similar to what I use in most of my images. Shadows brought them up. Blacks brought them up just a little bit. Curves just brought the highlights up a little bit. The luminance, the oranges to make the skin glow a little bit. And then bringing those blues down on the luminance to darken them up. Saturation didn't do too much. And then the blues move them into the teals. The highlights, I always like to add a little bit of teal into my highlights to kind of tone those out. And I'll probably bring this up to like 180. And then lens distortion didn't do anything. Grain added a little bit. Post crop vignette, I didn't add anything the first time. Maybe I add just a little bit. We'll go -4. And then the camera calibration, which is great, especially the saturation, the blues, to bring out those colors. And then I highly encourage you to play around with these. These will help you out with your skin tones as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I'm going to push Control- to zoom out. And this is what we have, the before and then the after, just with camera raw. And let's look at the before and after of everything that we have so far. So before and then the after. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run my red loom action that I have. And this kind of helps just make the skin pop just a little bit. So when I run that, if we go ahead and zoom in here, you'll see that the before and then the after, the skin kind of gets this nice little contrast. Now there's some areas where I don't like where it added, like on the leg, the arm, and then also in the sky. So the sky kind of got blown out a little bit. So I'm going to just switch my brush to the black brush and I'm going to remove it from the sky because I still want to have that sky detail. And as I mentioned, I don't want it to be added into this arm and even that leg right there. So we just removed it from there because I mainly wanted it just on the face And on the bottom corner here, added this nice little contrast here. The next area that I want to address is that hot spot right beneath where Angela was sitting. So I was photographing at Sal Del Rey, and what happens is this water turns into salt. A lot of people thought it was ice, but it's actually salt. And because it's white, and I had my light camera left pointed down, it's hitting that white surface, and it kind of got a little bit overexposed. So I'm gonna try to control those areas by using curves. So I'm gonna go into my layers panel. I'm gonna go to curves, and I'm gonna select this tool here that allows me to target the luminosity or the brightness level. So I'm gonna click and then just simply drag that down. Now, obviously right now it's affecting the entire image. So what I'm gonna do is I just wanna push Control-I on the keyboard. And what I can do is I can just get the brush tool, select white. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to brush that back in just in those areas. Now I am going to fix some of these little spots over here. I don't want it to get into the leg. And there's some areas up here that I kind of got just a little bit. So I'm just gonna make sure I fade that off. I'm using just a soft brush here at the top. So you could just use your soft round brush. And I'm just trying to fade this back in just so that I can target the specific area. So right there, now if I hit the backslash key, it's showing me exactly where I'm targeting. So I hit the backslash again. So let's just look at the before and then the after. Now the leg is a little bit dark in there, but I actually don't mind that. It's adding a little bit of shape, so I'm gonna leave it like that. So overall, I've kind of addressed that. Now I am gonna remove it from the hand. I am noticing that the hand just got a little bit of that darkness. So I'm just gonna remove it from the hand there. And so simple little fix right there with the curves. If I needed to, I could bring this down some more if I felt like it needed to. So right there, the before and then the after. My next step is I want to darken up specific areas and also target the blues. I'm going to go into my curves and I'm going to add one, and I'm going to bring down the overall exposure to right about here. Okay. Now, you know that I love using blend if, and I don't want it to add into my highlights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click over here. And what this allows me to do is that I can really target and hone in and say, okay, I don't want this darkness to go into my highlights. I just want to specifically darken up the midtones and below. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to remove this from my highlights. So I'm going to bring this number about to 165, and I'm going to feather that off. As you can see, these little hard edges that I have here. I'm going to hold the Alts and I'm going to break that apart, and it'll fade that entire effect. So once I hit OK, what I've essentially done is I've specifically just darkened up the background, the darks, and I can control that. Now, as I do this, you'll notice that the sky is coming out. This is coming out just a little bit more, but I don't necessarily want it to be darkened on the face. So I'm just going to get the black brush and I'm going to remove it from the body, just so that I'm not affecting and losing detail, especially on the skin tone and on the hair. Okay, so if I click the before, just a small subtle effect. Now, if I needed to, I could always just go back also to the curves if I felt like I went too far, and I can just raise this up and just add a little bit of darkness. Now I want to target the exposure of the blues. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my channels, and I'm going to go into my blue channel, and I'm going to push Control-5 to make a selection of it. And now that I have my selection, I'm going to come back and I'm going to go into my black and white. I'm going to change it to luminosity because I just want to address the brightness levels of the blues. So I'm going to go to luminosity. And then here on the blues, I'm going to go all the way down to -25. And that's just made those blues just a little bit more rich. And then I'm going to lower the opacity just a little bit. So I'm going to go about maybe 78, 76 is fine. Same thing. And then bam, there we go. So just those two subtle adjustments, just adding some darkness to the overall background, just so that she pops just a little bit more. I have about 4 more steps left, so don't leave. These steps are going to be very important because we're going to make the skin pop a little bit and we're going to add some final color grading. So in order to make the skin pop, I'm going to go over here into my curves once again. And I'm going to grab the highlights slider and I'm going to drag it to the left. And I want you to pay attention to the skin as it starts to glow here. So I'm going to drag this and I'm going to go about to 232 on my input. So if we look, this is the before and the after just on the skin. But you know this, I want to target it just a little bit more. We're going to go into blend depth. We're going to drag this into about 81. We're going to go a little bit faster because I think you guys get the idea here. And I'm going to fade this off so that it's only in specific areas that I want. I'm going to hit OK. And another thing is that I just want it on her. I don't necessarily want it on the background or anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my select subject. So I'm going to go here, select subject. And what I want to do is I want to inverse this. So I'm going to go select inverse. And the reason why I want to do that is so that when I fill it with black, it's going to add it to the background. So none of that background gets addressed. So I'm going to go to edit and then fill. We're going to go black, hit OK. And there we go. So you can see here on this little layer mask, this is where it's adding that brightness. It's adding it just a little bit here and here, but it's not going to be the end of the world. We'll be fine. And if I click the before and the after, and this is what we get. So you'll notice that we added just that little subtle skin pop to the image. And once again, if I feel like I went too far, you can always just bring this back a little bit. And there we go. So now we have that skin glow. The next step is adding a color grade. Now I like using infinite color sometimes when I get a little bit confused as far as where I'm going to want to color grade. So I already saved it. So I'm going to go all the way down. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's this one. So I'm going to click and drag. And just so FYI, you can save adjustment layers and stuff into your library. So I like doing that. So I'm going to make sure I hold Alt when I do this, because when I use Alt, what that's basically going to do is that it's going to make sure that I get all my layers. So part of this infinite color, I used curves, color balance, and the color lookup. Now, the only thing with this is that I loved the color grade. It added these nice blue hues, but I don't necessarily like what it's doing to the skin tone. We've lost that glow a little bit. So we're going to do the same thing that we did over here. We are going to add a layer mask, and we're going to just copy this same layer mask above because we want to mask it away from the skin tone. So I'm going to click and then drag this up. It says, do you want to replace the mask? Absolutely. Now, right now, it is actually applying it to the skin. We want the opposite. So it's pretty simple. All I got to do is just push Control I. Now we have the opposite. Now it's only adding this infinite color grade that I got from the color panel to the background. Now it's just a small difference, but these are the kind of blue tones that I like in my images. I'm super excited. This image is looking awesome. The final 2 steps, let's go through those really quick. So we're going to also darken up the background or the foreground here. I want more of the emphasis to go over here. So I'm going to add a new layer. And what I did is I went and I added a gradient to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my gradient, I'm going to push D on the keyboard. That'll reset it to black and white over here. And we're going to go into the basics panel. And I want this one right here, which is going to be foreground to transparent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in just like this. But this time though, we're going to make sure that the gradient is not on. We're going to make sure we're on the linear. So we're going to click and I'm going to hold shift so it's a straight line. There we go. So now we have that fade. Now it looks horrible right now. What we want to do is we want to blend this off. We're going to change it to soft light. And at that point, then I can lower the opacity to wherever I want. So by doing this, I'm going to just add a little bit more emphasis so that our eyes go right about here and this darkens it up. Now this is an optional step. If you don't want to add this, you don't have to, but I went ahead and added it. And then the final step is I added a final color grade curves to the image. So I'm just going to drag this in. And all this was, I have my fill at 35. If we click the before and after, it just adds these nice little hues and color to the image. Oops, sorry there. There we go. So before and then the after. Now, if we take a look at the curves that I actually set up, let's go into the properties real quick. You'll notice that I messed with the RGB. So my reds, I added that little curve, the greens, and then my blues, okay? So let's look at the overall image, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and zoom out. And I'm gonna hold Alt on the keyboard. This is the full body view or 100% zoomed out view or whatever. So there we go, before and after. Now let's do the zoom in right there so we can really see the skin detail and see the colors better. Before, after, before, and then after. And let's zoom in just a little bit more right about here. Before and then after. Before I let you guys go, don't forget, this is part 6 of my 6-part series of my full edits on YouTube. I have additional videos on my editing process, so don't forget to look throughout my YouTube channel for more helpful content, and I'll see you guys on the next one.